there is something quietly comforting about the idea that even now, even tonight, scientists somewhere are bent over glowing screens and microscope lenses, finding things that no human being has ever found before. Welcome to Sleepy Science. If these videos bring you a little peace at the end of your day, we would love it if you liked this one, subscribed, and left us a comment telling us what you want to dream about next. And if you want to help keep these long, slow, wandering videos alive, you can find the Sleepy Science Patreon at the link in the description. But for now, just let yourself settle. Because there is a great deal of gentle news from the world of science, and all of it can wait until you are comfortable. Let us begin somewhere small. Not with galaxies or deep trenches or the ancient bones of enormous creatures. Let us begin with something almost invisible. Scientists recently discovered that some species of moss are capable of a kind of slow, deliberate movement that had never been observed before. Not the waving of a frond in the wind, not the passive drift of a spore, but an actual, measured, intentional shifting of their bodies toward light and moisture, millimeter by patient millimeter, over the course of hours and days. For a long time, we thought of plants as rooted things, still things, things that simply existed in their spot and made the best of whatever conditions they found there. And yet here is this small green creature, pressing itself quietly across a surface, choosing a direction. There is something in that which feels important, though it is hard to say exactly why. Perhaps it is the reminder that life finds its way, even when we are not watching. Not far from that idea, researchers working with forests have found that trees communicate with one another through their root systems in ways that are more complex than we previously understood. This is not entirely new science. We have known for some years that trees exchange nutrients and chemical signals through underground networks of fungi. But a new set of studies has shown that older trees, the large ones at the center of a grove, appear to direct a disproportionate amount of carbon toward younger trees that are struggling. Not randomly, not evenly distributed across the forest, but specifically, measurably, toward the ones that need it most. Scientists are careful not to call this generosity, because trees do not think or feel in the ways that word implies. And yet, the behavior, when you sit with it, looks something like care. The forest, it turns out, tends to itself. Somewhere in the soft darkness of the deep ocean, a discovery was made recently that has quietly redrawn the edges of what we thought possible. Scientists exploring a hydrothermal vent field in the Pacific found organisms living not just near the vents, not just on the seafloor around them, but beneath the seafloor itself. These creatures, mostly microbes but some small invertebrates as well, were living inside the rock, in cracks and channels filled with superheated water, in total darkness, under enormous pressure, with no sunlight, no plants, no photosynthesis of any kind. They were feeding on the chemical energy released by the reaction between seawater and certain minerals. This process is called chemosynthesis, and it suggests something quietly profound, that life, wherever it finds energy, will attempt to exist. It does not require the sun. It does not require our particular set of comfortable conditions. It simply requires a source. And that thought, applied to other planets and moons, opens doors that it is perhaps best to consider slowly, gently, before sleep. On the subject of other worlds, astronomers recently detected what appears to be water vapor in the atmosphere of a planet orbiting another star. The planet is not particularly close by. It is many light years away, which means the light we used to detect it left that system long before any of us were born. But water vapor is a remarkable thing to find, because water is the solvent in which all life we know of conducts its chemistry. We are not saying there is life there. Science is careful about that. But the ingredients, the conditions, the atmospheric fingerprints that we look for when we are wondering about possibility, they were present. It is a little like finding flour and eggs and sugar in a kitchen and wondering if someone might bake a cake. You cannot be sure, but you can be quietly, carefully hopeful. Back on this planet, researchers recently made a discovery about octopuses that has lingered with me in a particular way. We already knew that octopuses were remarkable problem solvers, that they could open jars and navigate mazes and recognize individual human faces. But a new study found that octopuses appear to dream, or something that looks very much like dreaming. During a phase of sleep that resembles the REM state we experience, their skin flickers. Pulses of color and texture move across their bodies, the same textures and colors they use when awake for camouflage and communication, rippling and shifting in complex, unpredictable patterns. The researchers believe they may be re-experiencing their waking lives, replaying hunts, escapes, encounters. A small octopus, curled in the dark of the ocean floor, traveling somewhere in its own quiet mind. You are not so different right now. There is a bird called the alpine swift that was recently tracked by scientists using tiny data loggers attached to its body. They wanted to understand its migration patterns, its resting habits, where it went when it was not visible. What they found was that the swift spent more than 200 days continuously airborne. It ate in the air. It drank in the air, catching raindrops or skimming low over lakes in flight. And it slept in the air, gliding in great slow circles on the wind, one hemisphere of its brain resting at a time, while the other kept watch. More than 200 days without touching the ground. The Earth, for that bird, is almost a theoretical concept. A place that exists below. A place that is not home. Home is the air itself, the long, invisible currents, the slow, revolving sky. A team of geologists recently discovered evidence of an ancient river system beneath the sands of the Sahara Desert. Not a small stream, a major river, comparable in size to the Nile. It ran for thousands of kilometers through what is now one of the driest places on the planet. And it did so not once but repeatedly, in wet cycles that came and went, over hundreds of thousands of years. during those wetter periods, the Sahara was green. It had forests and wetlands and lakes teeming with fish and hippopotamuses, and an enormous variety of birds. People lived there, painted their lives on the stone walls of what is now deep, trackless desert. And then the climate shifted, slowly, over centuries, and the rivers dried, and the green faded, and the sand crept in. The desert we see today is young in geological terms. It is a temporary state. The river is still there, in a sense, just sleeping beneath the sand. Scientists studying the human microbiome have recently found that the collection of bacteria living in your gut is more individually unique than your fingerprints. Two people can have the same blood type, the same eye color, even identical DNA in the case of twins, and still have entirely different microbial communities living inside them. These communities, trillions of organisms, influence not just digestion, but mood, immune response, inflammation, and even the way certain medications work in your body. They are shaped by everything you eat, everyone you live with, every place you have ever been. You carry a living record of your life. Inside you, a quiet ecosystem that is entirely, utterly your own. And it is, even as you lie here, at work. A new study on human memory found something that changes the way I think about sleep. We have long known that sleep is important for consolidating memories, for taking the experiences of the day and moving them from short-term to long-term storage. But the new research found that during sleep, the brain does not just store memories passively, it edits them. It selectively strengthens some memories and quietly allows others to fade. It appears to run something like a prioritization algorithm, keeping the things that were emotionally significant or practically useful and gently releasing the details that did not matter. Your brain, right now, is deciding what to keep. It is a strange and beautiful thought that every sleep is also a gentle edit, a soft revision of who you are and what you carry with you. In the field of archaeology, a discovery was made recently, in a cave system in southern France, that pushed back the earliest known evidence of symbolic human art by tens of thousands of years. The paintings found there, rendered in red ochre, depicted animals and abstract shapes that appear to be roughly 80,000 years old. For a long time, we thought the impulse to make art, to represent the world rather than simply inhabit it, emerged relatively recently in human evolution. These paintings suggest otherwise. They suggest that some ancient ancestor of ours, standing in a cave with a piece of red stone, felt something that we still feel. The need to say, "I was here. I saw this. I wanted to make it last." That impulse did not begin with us. It was already very, very old. Astronomers have recently confirmed the existence of a new class of object in our galaxy, called a neutron star merger remnant. When two neutron stars orbit each other and finally spiral together, the collision releases more energy in a fraction of a second than our Sun will produce in its entire 10 billion year lifetime. But what happens after that collision was not well understood. The new observations suggest that in some cases, what remains is not a black hole, but something in between, an object so dense and strange that the laws of physics have to flex a little to accommodate it. It spins, it pulses, it radiates in frequencies we are still learning to read. The universe, it seems, is still inventing new kinds of things to be. Closer to home, scientists studying the climate history of the Arctic have found evidence of a period, roughly 56 million years ago, when the region was covered in palm trees. Not sparse, struggling vegetation, dense tropical forest, with temperatures warm enough for crocodiles to bask on what is now permafrost. This period, called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, was caused by a rapid release of carbon into the atmosphere, though what triggered it is still debated. What is known is that the world warmed very quickly, and then, over tens of thousands of years, cooled again. The Earth has been through enormous changes before. It has been tropical at the poles and frozen at the equator. It has worn all kinds of climates, the way we might wear different clothes through different seasons. The Earth will be fine. It is a patient, resilient thing. Whether we will be here to see its next costume change is the more interesting question. A group of researchers studying bird navigation recently found evidence that some species of migratory bird may be able to see the Earth's magnetic field. Not metaphorically, not in the sense of sensing a field through some vague biological compass, but actually, visually, perceiving the lines of magnetic force as a kind of overlay on their normal vision. The proposed mechanism involves a protein called cryptochrome, found in the eyes of birds, which appears to react to magnetic fields in a way that subtly alters how light is perceived. If this is correct, and the evidence is growing more persuasive, then a migrating bird sees a world that is decorated with invisible lines, a kind of map drawn in the light itself, guiding itself through the autumn dark. A different world, the same sky. Researchers in the field of genetics have made a discovery that is worth letting settle slowly. They have found that certain genes in humans can be switched on and off, not just by our own experience, but by our ancestors' experiences. This is the field of epigenetics, and while the idea is not new, recent studies have found evidence that stress, trauma, and even certain kinds of learning can leave marks on DNA that are passed down to children and grandchildren. Not changes to the sequence of the DNA itself, but changes to the way it is expressed, which genes are turned up loud and which are hushed. The life your grandparents lived, the things they endured or overcame, may be faintly present in the way your body responds to the world. You carry more history than you know, more inheritance than a name or a pair of eyes. A study published recently found that plants under stress emit a series of ultrasonic clicks and pops that cannot be heard by the human ear, but can be detected with sensitive microphones. When a tomato plant was deprived of water, it began clicking at a rate of dozens of times per minute. When its stem was cut, it clicked even faster. The sounds appear to come from tiny bubbles forming and collapsing inside the plant's water-conducting tubes, a process called cavitation. Whether these sounds carry any information, whether other plants or organisms respond to them in any way, is still being studied. But the idea that a garden, a field, a forest, is filled with a constant, inaudible conversation of tiny sounds, a whole acoustic world just beyond our hearing, sits with me quietly. The silence of a garden is not silence at all. Scientists have recently identified a new species of deep-sea fish that produces light in an entirely novel way. Most bioluminescent ocean creatures produce their own light through chemical reactions. But this newly discovered fish, found at depths of nearly 2 kilometers, appears to use something more like fluorescence, absorbing light at one wavelength and re-emitting it at a different one. The effect is that it seems to glow, even in the near-total darkness of the deep ocean, catching and transforming the faint blue light that filters down from above into a ghostly greenish shimmer. It lives in a world where light is almost theoretical, and still it finds a way to be seen. Or perhaps to see. It is not yet clear which. On the subject of light, physicists recently demonstrated an effect called quantum entanglement between particles separated by a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers. Entanglement is one of those ideas that resists easy description. When two particles are entangled, a measurement of one instantly affects the state of the other, regardless of the distance between them. Not after a delay, not after a signal travels between them. Instantly, as far as we can tell. Einstein famously called this spooky action at a distance, because it seemed to violate the rule that nothing can travel faster than light. But recent experiments keep confirming it at greater and greater distances, with higher and higher certainty. The universe, apparently, has a kind of connection that ignores space. Two things, far apart, still somehow touching. Research on sleep, and this feels especially fitting to mention, has recently uncovered a previously unknown function of the glymphatic system. The glymphatic system is the brain's cleaning mechanism, a network of channels that flushes waste products from the brain during sleep. Scientists already knew this happened. What they recently discovered is that this cleaning process is far more rhythmic than previously understood. It operates in slow, gentle pulses, waves of cerebrospinal fluid, washing through the brain's tissues, in coordination with the slow oscillations of deep sleep. Your brain, as you drift, is being washed, gently, rhythmically, like a tide moving through a quiet harbor in the middle of the night. A discovery in paleontology recently revealed that some dinosaurs, specifically a group of small feathered theropods, appear to have engaged in behavior that looks very much like play. The evidence comes from fossilized scratch marks on rocks found in Colorado and Wyoming, made by the claws of large bird-like dinosaurs, in patterns that do not match feeding or nesting behavior. The marks are arranged in parallel sets, made at specific sites that were returned to repeatedly, and researchers believe they may have been part of a courtship display. But what is quietly remarkable is the element of repetition, of returning to a spot and doing a thing, not for food or survival, but perhaps for the pleasure of doing it, or for the ritual of it. Play, or something adjacent to play, may be much older than we thought. Older than mammals. Older than us by a very long time. A study of the ocean's capacity to absorb carbon was recently revised significantly upward. New measurements and models suggest that phytoplankton, the tiny single-celled organisms that drift through the surface waters of the sea, are absorbing far more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere than previous estimates suggested. These organisms perform roughly half of all photosynthesis on Earth. Half. The rainforests get a great deal of attention, and they deserve it, but the ocean's surface, glittering and often invisible to us, is doing an equally enormous amount of work. Every breath you take, roughly 1 in every 2 oxygen molecules, came from the sea. From something too small to see, floating in water, doing its quiet work, somewhere out in the deep blue. Neuroscientists have recently discovered that the human brain has a previously unknown type of cell. Not a neuron exactly, but a hybrid between a neuron and a glial cell, a support cell that was previously thought not to be directly involved in information processing. These new hybrid cells, found in the outer layer of the human cortex, appear to help regulate the activity of neurons nearby, with a precision that neither cell type manages on its own. The brain's architecture, which we have been studying intensively for well over a century, still holds surprises, still contains structures and mechanisms that no one has described before. The organ that is doing the work of reading these words to you, that is softening now towards sleep, is more intricate than we have so far managed to fully understand. Somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, researchers recently documented a whale singing a song that had never been recorded before. Not a new variation of a known humpback song, a completely novel pattern from a species not previously known to sing complex songs at all. The song contained repeating phrases, rhythm, and what appeared to be a structure. And it was being sung alone, in open ocean, far from any other member of its species. We do not know what it meant. We do not know if it meant anything in the way we use the word meaning. But the sound itself, recorded and preserved, is something entirely new in the world. A voice, enormous and unhurried, singing in the dark water, for reasons of its own. Chemists recently synthesized a new material that is harder than diamond. This has been attempted many times before, and various materials have been claimed to rival diamond's hardness. But this new compound, a form of carbon nitride, appears to be genuinely, measurably harder. What makes this interesting, beyond the obvious applications in engineering and manufacturing, is what it tells us about the periodic table, about how atoms can be arranged. We tend to think of the elements as a fixed set, their behaviors well understood. But new combinations, new arrangements of old materials, keep producing new properties that no one had predicted. Matter is still surprising us. The building blocks are the same, but how they fit together is apparently not yet fully mapped. A study on human connection recently found something both simple and quietly moving. Researchers measured the neural activity of people listening to music together in the same room versus listening to the same music alone. When people listened together, their brain waves began to synchronize, not just in mood or emotional response, but in the actual electrical rhythms of their brain activity, measured in real time. The longer they listened together, the more their neural patterns converged. Something in the experience of shared attention brings minds literally closer together. It is one of those findings that feels less like a discovery and more like a confirmation of something you already quietly knew. Scientists studying coral reefs have recently found that some species of coral are developing genetic resistance to warming waters. This is not happening fast enough, and the reefs are still under enormous stress. But within certain populations of coral, in naturally warmer lagoons, individuals have emerged that can withstand temperatures that would bleach and kill their neighbors. These heat-tolerant corals are being carefully studied and, in some cases, selectively transplanted to stressed reefs. It is a painstaking, slow, uncertain process, but it suggests that life, even under pressure, finds a way to bend rather than break. The reef is not giving up. It is, in its own biological way, adapting. Astronomers using a new generation of radio telescopes recently detected a signal that repeats every few seconds from a source deep in our galaxy. These are called fast radio bursts, and while they are not new, this particular one is unusual because of the regularity of its repetition and the specific frequency pattern it produces. Fast radio bursts are one of the genuine mysteries of modern astronomy. We have candidate explanations, magnetars, compact binary systems, but no confirmed source for the repeating ones. Something, very far away, is broadcasting something in a rhythm into the dark. And we are listening, instruments tilted toward the sky, patient as a person waiting for a name they half recognize to come clear. In the world of materials science, researchers recently created a material that repairs itself. Inspired by the structure of bone, which is constantly being broken down and rebuilt by specialized cells, they developed a synthetic polymer that, when cut or cracked, can reform its chemical bonds on its own, given a little warmth and time. Small scratches in the material heal completely overnight. Larger damages take longer, but the material does not give up. It simply waits and slowly puts itself back together. There is something in that idea that feels worth carrying. The capacity to be broken and still, given a little warmth, find your way back. A discovery in the field of archaeology came not from a cave or a dig site, but from a library. Researchers analyzing ancient texts from Mesopotamia, clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform script, found what appear to be mathematical tables that predate known Babylonian mathematics by several centuries. These tablets contain calculations involving what we now call trigonometric ratios, used to compute the ratios of sides in right triangles. The Babylonians were doing trigonometry more than 3,000 years ago, not as an abstract exercise, but as a practical tool for surveying land and constructing buildings. The mathematics we use to build modern bridges and calculate satellite trajectories was being worked out by candlelight with a reed pressed into clay before Rome existed. Scientists studying ant colonies have discovered that ants engage in a behavior called social immunity. When a member of the colony becomes infected with a fungal pathogen, other ants respond by grooming the infected individual, removing spores before they can spread. But the remarkable new finding is that the healthy ants who perform this grooming expose themselves to small doses of the pathogen in the process, and this appears to prime their immune system in a way that makes them more resistant. The colony is essentially vaccinating itself through mutual care. Each act of grooming is both treatment for the sick and preparation for the healthy. The community protects itself by taking care of its most vulnerable members, which is, if you sit with it, a principle that travels rather well. Researchers studying ancient permafrost in Siberia recently revived a species of tiny roundworm, or nematode, that had been frozen in the permafrost for approximately 46,000 years. 46,000 years. It had survived in a state of cryptobiosis, a kind of suspended animation, in which all metabolic processes essentially stop. When it was thawed, it began to move. It began to eat. It reproduced. It went about its tiny life, as though nothing unusual had happened, as though the last 46,000 years had simply been a long night's sleep. Life, it turns out, is in some cases a state you can pause and return to. A small and ancient thing, waiting in the cold for conditions to improve. A new analysis of the Moon's interior has suggested that its core may be solid iron, similar in composition to the Earth's inner core. This may not sound remarkable at first, but for decades, scientists debated whether the Moon's core was solid or liquid, or some combination of both, because the Moon's small size makes it difficult to measure. The new data comes from careful analysis of how seismic waves generated by moonquakes travel through the lunar interior, and the picture that emerges is of a world with a solid heart, quiet and dense at its center, surrounded by layers that grew cooler as the Moon aged over 4 billion years. The Moon is not a simple rock. It has layers. It has a history. It has a heart. Scientists working with CRISPR gene editing technology have recently demonstrated the first successful correction of a genetic disease in a living human patient using a single treatment. The patient, who had a severe form of hereditary blindness, received a direct injection of gene editing components into the cells of the retina. Within months, their light-sensitive cells began functioning more normally. Vision that had been fading stabilized. In some measures, it improved. We are standing at the very beginning of an era in which the text of a person's DNA can be carefully, selectively rewritten. The implications are vast and complicated and will take decades to fully understand. But tonight, it is enough to know that someone who could not see can see a little better. A team of physicists recently succeeded in creating a state of matter called a time crystal. This is a phase of matter, like solid, liquid, or gas, but with a property that distinguishes it from all the others. In a time crystal, the atoms are arranged not just in a repeating pattern through space, but in a repeating pattern through time. They oscillate, they tick between two states, back and forth, indefinitely, without requiring any energy input to maintain the motion. This appears to violate the second law of thermodynamics, which says that systems naturally tend toward disorder. And yet, under very specific conditions, this ordered, rhythmic oscillation persists. Time itself, in this system, has a kind of structure, a pattern, a repetition, like a pendulum that never needs to be wound. Biologists studying the genetics of aging recently discovered that a small species of jellyfish, the Turritopsis dornii, reverses its aging process through a mechanism that was not previously understood. This jellyfish can, when stressed or damaged, revert from its mature adult form back to its earlier juvenile stage and then grow again. It does this through a process called transdifferentiation, in which mature, specialized cells revert to an earlier, more flexible state and then respecialize into different cell types. The new research has mapped the genetic changes that make this possible. There are specific genes that are switched on and off in a precise sequence to orchestrate this reversal. Understanding that sequence may one day tell us something important about how aging works in other creatures, including, possibly, us. Geologists studying the deep interior of the Earth have found evidence of a previously unknown layer between the outer and inner core. The Earth's structure has long been described as a series of concentric layers: crust, mantle, outer core, inner core, each with its own composition and temperature. But seismic data, gathered from hundreds of earthquakes over decades, suggests there is a transition zone within the inner core itself, a region where the iron crystals are arranged differently from those in the surrounding material. The Earth, even its deepest secret heart, is more complicated than the diagrams suggest. Beneath your feet, beneath thousands of kilometers of rock and liquid metal and pressure, there is a world we are still figuring out. A study of language acquisition in infants found something that caused the researchers to revise their understanding of how early language learning begins. It had been assumed that babies start learning language in the months after birth, as they begin hearing words repeated and connected to objects. But new imaging technology has allowed scientists to observe fetal brain activity in response to spoken language in the final months of pregnancy. And the fetal brain, it turns out, responds differentially to speech sounds. It distinguishes between the native language and foreign languages. It responds to rhythm and intonation. The learning begins before the light, before the first breath, before the face looking down. A new mind, in the dark, already listening. Scientists exploring the behavior of slime molds have made a discovery that continues to blur our assumptions about where intelligence lives. Slime molds are single-celled organisms. Technically, though they can merge into vast networks containing millions of cells acting in coordination. Researchers placed a slime mold in a model of the greater Tokyo metropolitan area, with food placed at the locations of major cities. Given time, the slime mold grew a network of connections between the food sources that closely resembled the actual rail network that humans designed over decades. Efficient, resilient, redundant in the right places. With no brain, no neurons, no planning, a single-celled organism found essentially the same solution that human engineers found. Intelligence, or something that behaves exactly like it, does not seem to require a brain. In a study of ancient human genomes, researchers found evidence of a group of modern humans who interbred with the Neanderthals more extensively than previously known. We have known for some years that modern non-African humans carry roughly 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, the legacy of encounters that happened as modern humans first moved out of Africa into Eurasia. But the new analysis found evidence of a population that had multiple, separate, repeated encounters with Neanderthal groups over thousands of years. They were not just passing through the same landscape. They were living alongside each other, interacting, sharing. The Neanderthal is not entirely gone. Something of them persists, quietly, in us. A group of astrophysicists studying the large-scale structure of the universe recently published findings suggesting that galaxies are not distributed randomly in space, but are arranged along filaments and sheets that form a vast cosmic web. This is not entirely new. The cosmic web has been understood in broad outline for decades, but the new data, gathered from the largest galaxy survey ever conducted, reveals details of this structure at a resolution that was not previously possible. The filaments are not just long threads. They are braided, layered, connected at nodes, where the greatest concentrations of matter gather. The universe, at its largest scale, looks like a vast and ancient network. Like the fibers of a brain, like the threads of a mycelium, like the branching of a river delta, seen from very, very far above. Scientists recently identified a new organ in the human body. This sounds like a startling claim, and it is, though it comes with nuance. A structure called the interstitium, a network of fluid-filled spaces in the connective tissue throughout the body, had previously been described in anatomy, but classified as simple connective tissue. New imaging technology revealed that this network is actually a coherent, interconnected structure with distinct properties and functions. It surrounds every organ, lines every major duct and tube, and appears to serve as a kind of shock absorber and fluid highway throughout the body. The atlas of the human body, which we have been drawing for centuries, still has blank spaces, structures hiding in plain sight, waiting for a technology precise enough to finally see them. Ecologists studying predator-prey relationships have recently documented what they are calling a landscape of fear. The idea is this: the mere presence of a predator, even without any actual predation occurring, changes the behavior of prey animals in ways that ripple through the entire ecosystem. In Yellowstone National Park, after wolves were reintroduced, elk began avoiding certain river valleys, even when wolves were not present there. The valleys recovered, vegetation returned, riverbanks stabilized, birds returned, fish populations recovered. Not because the wolves were actively managing any of this, but because the possibility of wolves changed the choices of elk. The shadow of a thing can change the landscape as surely as the thing itself. Chemists have recently synthesized a molecule that does not exist anywhere in nature. This is not unusual. Chemistry has been creating novel molecules for a long time. But what makes this one quietly interesting is what it can do. The molecule binds selectively to a protein that is overproduced in certain types of cancer cells, a protein that helps cancer resist treatment. In laboratory and early animal studies, the molecule appears to make cancer cells vulnerable again to treatments they had learned to resist. It is early-stage research. There are many steps between a laboratory result and a medicine. But somewhere in a research facility right now, a molecule that has never existed on this planet before is being carefully, patiently studied for the possibility of healing. Researchers studying volcanoes recently discovered that the timing of large eruptions can be influenced by the gravitational pull of the moon. This effect is small, and it does not override all the other factors that drive eruptions. But statistical analysis of eruption records, going back several centuries, shows a faint but real correlation between the phases of the moon, particularly the new and full moon when tidal forces are greatest, and slight increases in eruption frequency. The same gravitational force that pulls the oceans into tides tugs, very gently, at the molten rock beneath the Earth's crust. The Moon, your constant companion, reaches down through the sky and into the deep interior of the Earth. It is all connected, the way things always are, when you look carefully enough. A study of Antarctic ice cores recently extended our climate record back to more than 800,000 years ago. The ice cores are extraordinary archives. Each layer of ice contains trapped air bubbles that preserve a sample of the atmosphere from the year the ice formed. Scientists can drill down through layer after layer and read the composition of an ancient atmosphere with remarkable precision. The new cores reveal that the relationship between carbon dioxide levels and global temperature has been consistent and clear across 800,000 years of climate cycles. Every time carbon dioxide rose, temperatures followed. Every time it fell, the climate cooled. The ice remembers. It stores the whole long story in its blue and silent layers, waiting for someone to read it. Astronomers have recently detected what appears to be a rogue planet, wandering alone through interstellar space, without any star to orbit. Rogue planets are not a new concept. We have suspected for decades that planets are sometimes ejected from their solar systems during the chaotic early period of system formation. But this new detection, made using gravitational microlensing, is one of the most precise yet, suggesting the rogue planet is roughly Earth-sized. A world, perhaps not so different from this one in size, drifting in absolute darkness between the stars. No sunrises, no seasons, no warmth from above, just the slow, cold transit through the dark between one place and the next. A world with no story that we know of, but a world nonetheless. Psychologists studying the nature of creativity have recently found that the brain's default mode network, the network that activates when we are resting, or daydreaming, or letting the mind wander, plays a more central role in creative problem solving than the focused attention network. In other words, the most creative insights often come not when we are concentrating hard on a problem, but when we step away from it, when we let the mind drift, when we wash the dishes or take a walk, or, relevantly, begin to fall asleep. The softest state of mind is often the most generative one, which means that whatever you are puzzling over tonight, the answer may come easier if you simply stop reaching for it and let it arrive on its own. A recent study in marine biology has found that the Atlantic Ocean is home to a current of cold, dense water flowing from the Arctic toward the equator that is significantly weaker than it was 50 years ago. This current, part of the larger Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, helps regulate the climate of Europe and North America. It carries warm surface water north and cold deep water south, like a conveyor belt of temperature running through the ocean. If it were to slow significantly or stop, the climate consequences would be profound. This is not a distant or theoretical concern. The weakening is measurable. The ocean is doing something different. than it has done in recorded history. We are living in the middle of a change, whose full dimensions we can only partially see. Scientists recently measured the age of the oldest known living tree and found it to be older than previous estimates suggested. A specimen of Great Basin bristlecone pine, growing at high altitude in the mountains of California, has been dated at over 5,000 years old. 5,000 years. It was already centuries old. When the pyramids of Giza were being built, it was already ancient. When Homer composed the Iliad, it has lived through every climate shift, every political change, every rise and fall of every civilization that humanity has managed to produce in the last 5 millennia. And it is still there, gnarled and unhurried and alive, at the edge of the tree line, in the thin, cold air, making no particular fuss about any of it. A study of human facial recognition found recently that people are better at recognizing faces of their own species than faces of other species, which is not surprising, but also that this tendency can be significantly reduced with even brief training and exposure. The brain's visual system, it turns out, is far more flexible than the idea of innate pattern recognition suggests. Show a person enough faces of another species over time, and the brain adapts. It builds new templates. It finds the individual in what first looked like a category. We see better what we spend time looking at. We find more nuance where we look more closely, which is perhaps true of more than just faces. Researchers have recently discovered that the human nose can detect approximately 1 trillion distinct scents, a number that is orders of magnitude higher than the previously accepted estimate of 10,000. The study tested participants' ability to distinguish between synthetic mixtures of varying molecular components and found that the olfactory system is staggeringly sensitive and precise. 1 trillion is a number too large to hold comfortably. So think of it this way. Every scent you have ever encountered, every specific moment called back to you by a smell, every kitchen, every garden, every particular winter morning, represents just a tiny fragment of what you are capable of detecting. You are walking through a world far more scented than you will ever fully notice. A new paper in the field of animal cognition found that ravens can plan for the future in ways that require them to delay gratification, not just by a few seconds, which many animals can do, but by up to 17 hours. In experiments, ravens were given a choice between a small reward they could have immediately and a tool they would need to use later to access a larger reward. They consistently chose the tool, set it aside, and used it successfully when the opportunity arose, even after a long delay. The raven holds tomorrow in mind while navigating today. Its bright black eye looks not just at what is in front of it, but at what is coming. Scientists studying the relationship between music and the brain have recently confirmed that musical training in childhood produces structural changes in the brain that persist into old age, even in people who stopped playing music many decades earlier. The areas of the brain associated with fine motor control auditory processing, and the integration of sensory information are measurably different in people who played an instrument as a child. The brain, shaped by music early in life, holds that shaping for the rest of its days. Whatever you learned in childhood, deeply and repeatedly, left a mark in the structure of who you are. Not a scar, a groove, a pathway worn smooth by 1,000 repetitions that still, quietly, carry traffic. Astronomers recently captured the most detailed image ever taken of a star's surface other than our Sun, using a network of telescopes spread across the Earth and linked together. To act as a single enormous instrument, they resolved the surface of the star Betelgeuse in enough detail to see individual convection cells, vast regions of hot gas rising and falling, in a slow, enormous churn. Each of those cells is larger than our entire Sun. The scale of Betelgeuse is one of those things that resists the mind's attempt to picture it. If it were placed at the center of our solar system, it would swallow Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. Jupiter would barely make it out. And yet, from here, it is a faint orange point of light, in the shoulder of Orion, easy to overlook, on a clear winter night. A study of human social behavior found recently that the experience of awe, that particular feeling of encountering something vast and difficult to comprehend, has measurable effects on generosity, patience, and the sense of having enough time. People who had recently experienced awe were more willing to help strangers, reported feeling less rushed, and felt more connected to humanity as a whole. The experience of smallness, of encountering something larger than yourself, makes you, paradoxically, more generous and more at ease. As though the edges of the self soften when they meet something immense enough. Whatever you have been carrying today, let it be a little smaller now. Let the night be a little larger. Researchers recently mapped, for the first time in full detail, the neural connections of a small section of the human cerebral cortex. Not the whole brain, just a cubic millimeter. 1 cubic millimeter of grey matter, about the size of a grain of sand. Inside that grain of sand, they found approximately 57,000 cells, roughly 150 million synaptic connections, and nearly 10 kilometers of nerve fiber. 10 kilometers in a grain of sand. The map took years to produce. It is so complex that the data file is enormous enough to fill thousands of computers. And the brain contains roughly 1 million of those cubic millimeters. The territory of the mind, if you could walk it, would take a lifetime. Scientists working on the development of lab-grown meat have recently demonstrated that cultivated chicken cells can be grown into a product that is biologically identical to conventional chicken muscle. The cells divide and differentiate in a bioreactor, fed by a nutrient solution, and form the same proteins, the same textures, the same nutritional profile as meat grown in an animal's body. This is still an emerging technology, with cost and scale as significant challenges, but the biological barrier has been crossed. We know it is possible to produce animal protein without the animal. Whatever you think about the implications, the fact of it is quietly remarkable. The food of the future may be grown in a tank instead of a field. A team of marine biologists recently documented a previously unknown behavior in dolphins, a kind of social ritual that appears to serve no immediate survival function. A group of bottlenose dolphins in a bay off the coast of Australia were observed gathering at dusk, at the same location repeatedly, over many weeks. They would circle slowly, vocalize in a pattern that the researchers described as call and response, and then disperse. No feeding was observed, no mating, no apparent practical purpose. Just this gathering, this exchange, this ritual occurrence at the same place at the same time. We do not know what it means to them, but it looks, in some lights, like something like ceremony. Research on the physics of fluids has recently revealed a new type of wave behavior in the ocean that had not been previously described. These are called internal waves, and they travel not on the surface of the sea, but within it, at the boundary between layers of water with different temperatures and densities. Some of these waves are enormous, hundreds of meters tall. They move slowly, invisibly, through the interior of the ocean, disturbing sediment on the seafloor, affecting the distribution of plankton, carrying cold water upward and warm water down. The ocean is full of motion that its surface does not reveal. Waves within waves, currents folded inside currents, a moving world below the moving world. Astronomers recently observed the death of a star in real time for the first time in history. The star, located in a galaxy roughly 120 million light-years away, had been monitored by telescopes in the years before it exploded. The data showed that the star's outer layers began brightening and pulsating. In the months before the supernova, the star was, in some detectable way, restless. Before the end, we watched a sun die, a sun with, possibly, its own planets, its own system, its own ancient light, going dark. And the light of that ending reached us, still crossing space, from 120 million years ago. A study of microplastics recently found them in a location that surprised even the researchers who were looking. Not in ocean water, where they were expected. Not in river sediment, but in human brain tissue, at concentrations that have apparently been increasing, decade by decade. What this means for human health is not yet understood. The particles are inert in some respects, but they carry chemical coatings that may not be. It is early research, and the implications are still being worked out. But the finding reminds us that the materials we make do not simply stay where we put them. They travel, they accumulate, they find their way into places we never intended them to go. A team of ecologists recently found that wolves reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park have, over 3 decades, changed the course of rivers. Not directly, but by changing the behavior of elk, which changed the vegetation along riverbanks, which stabilized the banks and reduced erosion, which altered the flow and meandering of the rivers themselves. This is called a trophic cascade. A change at one level of the ecosystem reverberates through every level, all the way down to the physical landscape. The wolves did not intend to move the rivers. They simply lived their lives, hunting, resting, moving, and the rivers, over decades, quietly shifted. Presence matters. The act of simply being somewhere, living out one's nature, changes the landscape around you in ways you may never know. Scientists studying the behavior of black holes have recently confirmed, through observation, a theoretical prediction that had stood for decades. When a black hole spins, the space around it is dragged along in the direction of the spin. This is called frame dragging. It is a consequence of general relativity, Einstein's description of gravity as a warping of space-time. The new observations, made using a network of radio telescopes observing the jet of material ejected from a supermassive black hole, confirmed that the jet precesses wobbles in a slow circular motion at exactly the rate that frame dragging predicts. Space itself is spinning, being pulled around by the rotation of something so massive. It has no surface, no edge, only a boundary, past which nothing returns. Biologists have recently described a new mechanism by which certain plants communicate with pollinators. Beyond color and scent, which have long been known as attractants, some flowers generate a weak electrical field that bumblebees can detect using sensitive hairs on their bodies. The electrical pattern is different for each flower species, and it changes in real time depending on whether a bee has recently visited. After a bee collects nectar, the flower's electrical field shifts briefly, in a way that signals to the next bee, "This one was recently visited. Come back later." The flower updates its status electrically. The bees read it before they land. A conversation in fields we cannot feel, happening in every meadow, in every garden, every time the light is warm enough for a bee to fly. Researchers studying early childhood development have recently found that infants as young as 6 months old have a rudimentary sense of fairness. In experiments where puppets distributed resources unequally between 2 recipients, infants showed sustained visual attention, a measure of surprise, to the unequal distribution. They expected, at 6 months, before any language, before any social instruction, that things should be divided evenly. The sense of fairness is not taught. It arrives with us. We come into the world with a ready-made intuition that some arrangements of things are right and others are not. We spend the rest of our lives arguing about what that means. Scientists studying the neuroscience of pain have recently identified a previously unknown pathway by which the body suppresses pain signals during sleep. The pathway involves a particular type of neuron in the brainstem that becomes active during slow-wave sleep and releases a chemical that dampens pain transmission throughout the spinal cord. This is one of the reasons that pain often feels less acute after a night's sleep, not just because we are distracted from it, not just because we are rested, but because the sleeping brain actively reaches down into the body's pain circuits and turns them down. Sleep heals in more ways than we realized. It is not just rest. It is repair. Active, quiet, cellular repair. A team of physicists recently created the coldest known temperature ever achieved in a laboratory. The record was set using a cloud of ultra-cold atoms, manipulated with precisely tuned laser light, reaching a temperature just a few trillionths of a degree above absolute zero. Absolute zero is the point at which atoms have no thermal motion at all, the theoretical floor of temperature. At this near absolute zero, quantum effects dominate entirely. Atoms behave like waves. Separate particles blur into a single unified state. The boundary between this thing and that thing dissolves. There is a kind of peace in that image, if you let yourself feel it. Everything at its quietest. Every restless particle, finally, completely still. Ecologists working in Madagascar recently discovered 3 new species of chameleon that are among the smallest reptiles ever found. The smallest of the 3, called Brucasia nana, is small enough to balance on the tip of your finger with a body length of roughly 13 millimeters. It is among the smallest amniotes, land-adapted vertebrates, known to science. It changes color. It has 2 tiny eyes that can move independently. It hunts microscopic prey in the leaf litter of a specific forest, in a specific range of altitude. The world contains animals so small and so specifically adapted to their particular corner of it, that we are still finding them, still naming them, in forests that have not yet been fully explored. Scientists studying the development of language in the brain recently found that bilingual people show different patterns of cognitive reserve in old age compared to monolingual people. Cognitive reserve refers to the brain's ability to continue functioning normally, even as the physical structures of the brain age or are damaged. Bilingual individuals appear, on average, to develop symptoms of dementia later in life than those who speak only one language. The leading hypothesis is that managing 2 languages simultaneously throughout a lifetime builds additional neural pathways and networks that the brain can use as alternative routes when the more direct ones begin to deteriorate. Every language you have ever learned, every word in a different tongue, is a small piece of protection the brain has given itself. A study published recently in the journal Nature described the discovery of a new type of aurora in the atmosphere of Jupiter. Auroras on Earth are caused by charged particles from the Sun, colliding with atmospheric gases, producing the green and purple lights that shimmer over the poles. Jupiter has its own auroras, generated by the same process, but on an enormous scale. The new type, however, appears to be caused not by solar particles, but by interactions between Jupiter and its moon Io, which is so volcanically active that it continuously injects sulfur and oxygen into space. Jupiter and Io are connected by an invisible electromagnetic thread, and where that thread meets Jupiter's atmosphere, a aurora blazes. Two worlds, linked by an invisible bridge of energy, painting light together in the dark. Researchers studying birdsong have recently found that songbirds learn new elements of their songs during sleep. Young birds practice their songs consciously during the day, making errors, repeating phrases, gradually refining their output. But during sleep, recordings of their neural activity reveal that the brain replays the song in compressed, sped-up form, apparently running through the motor sequences of the day's practice and consolidating what it has learned. The bird sings in its sleep, silently, in the neurons that make music. And when it wakes, its song is measurably cleaner, more precise than it was the night before. You too are practicing something tonight, something the waking mind cannot fully do. The work of sleep is not passive, it is practice in the dark. A team of researchers recently found that the microbiome of the human skin, the community of bacteria and fungi living on its surface, plays an active role in wound healing. Certain bacteria produce compounds that reduce inflammation and accelerate the migration of skin cells across the wound site. Others produce substances that kill pathogens more effectively than the body's immune system alone. The skin is not a sterile environment that we try to keep clean. It is a carefully managed ecosystem, a collaboration between human and microbial cells that tends to itself in ways we are only beginning to appreciate. You are, right now, home to a vast community that is looking after you. Scientists recently found evidence of liquid water beneath the surface of Mars. Not just one lake, as a previous detection suggested, but a system of several bodies of water beneath the South Polar ice cap, kept liquid by the pressure of the ice above, and possibly by the heat of geothermal activity below. The water, if it is there, is almost certainly salty and cold, not the kind of environment where complex life would thrive. But on Earth, life has been found in very similar conditions, beneath kilometers of Antarctic ice, in salty brines, well below the freezing point of fresh water. The Mars beneath the surface may be more interesting than the Mars we can see. And the Mars we can see is already quite interesting enough. Researchers studying social hierarchies in chimpanzees found recently that high-ranking individuals live longer than low-ranking ones, but only during stable political periods. During periods of social upheaval, when the hierarchy is being contested, high-ranking individuals face increased stress and show measurable declines in immune function that can cut their lives short. Power, the research suggests, is expensive to maintain. The energy required to hold a position when others are challenging it takes a physical toll that outlasts any individual struggle. The stress of the contest enters the body. The body remembers. Stillness, it turns out, is not only pleasant, it is physiologically generous. Scientists studying the behavior of water at the quantum level have recently found that hydrogen atoms in liquid water tunnel through the barriers between molecules far more frequently than classical physics would predict. Quantum tunneling is the phenomenon whereby a particle passes through a barrier that, according to classical mechanics, it does not have enough energy to cross. In the quantum world, the barrier can be crossed anyway. Not over it, not around it, but through it, as if it were not entirely solid. The water you drank today, the water that moves through your cells right now, is doing something impossible, several trillion times a second. The ordinary is everywhere, threaded with the strange. A study of ancient DNA extracted from archaeological sites across Europe and Asia has recently revealed a migration event that happened roughly 5,000 years ago and fundamentally reshaped the population of Europe. A group from the steppes of the Pontic region, associated with the Yamnaya culture, moved westward in enormous numbers, and within a few centuries had contributed ancestry to a large proportion of Europeans. They brought with them a language that would eventually become, through thousands of years of change, almost every European language spoken today. The English you are listening to now, its deep grammar, its oldest roots, arrived with people walking across a steppe 5,000 years ago. Language, like water, moves, finds the low places, fills them, stays. Scientists have recently confirmed that certain gut bacteria produce neuroactive compounds that can cross the blood-brain barrier and influence mood and anxiety. Among these compounds are precursors to serotonin, dopamine, and gamma-aminobutyric acid, neurotransmitters that play central roles in emotional regulation and stress response. The gut-brain axis, the communication network between the digestive system and the nervous system, is now understood to be bidirectional and far more active than previously realized. The state of your gut influences the state of your mind. The food you eat changes the chemistry of your thoughts. The boundary between body and mind is not where we thought it was. It never was a clear line, more of a membrane, a permeable one. Researchers recently discovered that elephants have a name for each other. Not a category name, not a sound that means elephant, but individual names, specific calls that refer to one individual elephant and not another. The study used machine learning to analyze thousands of recordings and found that certain calls were used specifically when directed at one individual, and that those individuals responded more strongly when their own name call was used than when another elephant's name call was played. They know each other by name. They call to each other across distances, through the low frequencies, that travel through the ground itself, by name. Being named may be older than language, older than us. A way of saying, in whatever frequency one speaks, I know you. I am calling for you. A study of ancient star clusters recently found stars older than the previously estimated age of the universe. This caused a quiet stir in astrophysics. If a star appears to be older than the universe itself, something in our measurements must be wrong. Either the age of the star is overestimated, or the age of the universe is underestimated, or there is some physics we are not yet accounting for. The tension has not been fully resolved. Scientists are carefully examining each assumption. New telescope data is being gathered. The argument is happening quietly, in papers and conferences and long emails late at night. Science does this. It finds a contradiction and does not look away from it. It leans in, puzzled, patient, until the picture clears. Researchers in the field of materials science recently observed a superconducting material operating at a temperature closer to room temperature than any previous superconductor. Superconductors are materials that conduct electricity with absolutely no resistance. Every electrical circuit we use today loses some energy as heat. Every power line, every motor, every charger. A superconductor loses nothing. The problem has always been that known superconductors only work at temperatures close to absolute zero, requiring expensive and complicated cooling systems. A room temperature superconductor would be transformative. Transmission lines with no loss, computers with no wasted heat, magnetic levitation without enormous refrigeration. We are not there yet, but each new record closes the distance a little. The gap between now and that future is shrinking, slowly, one experiment at a time. Scientists studying the formation of the moon have recently proposed a new model that explains several previously puzzling features. The standard model holds that the moon formed when a body roughly the size of Mars collided with the early Earth about 4.5 billion years ago, and the debris coalesced into the moon. But the new model suggests that rather than one giant impact, there may have been a series of smaller impacts over millions of years, each contributing material to a growing moonlet that eventually stabilized. The moon we see, vast and silver and familiar, may have been assembled gradually, piece by piece, over an inconceivably long time. Built slowly, the way most lasting things are. A study of the world's largest organism recently revised our estimates of its age. Pando, a clonal colony of quaking aspen trees in the mountains of Utah, is a single organism. What looks like a forest of individual trees is actually thousands of genetically identical trunks, growing from a single, enormous root system. New dating methods suggest the root system may be as old as 80,000 years, though some estimates reach considerably higher. 80,000 years of roots. Through every ice age, every drought, every fire, the trunks above die and grow again. The roots beneath remain. the forest that looks like a forest, is one thing, one life, holding very quietly to its ground. Researchers recently studied the migration patterns of monarch butterflies and discovered that the butterflies navigate using both the position of the sun and the Earth's magnetic field simultaneously, integrating two entirely different navigational systems into a single coherent sense of direction. Each butterfly is born with this capability. It is not learned. No elder butterfly teaches the route. The route is written somehow into the architecture of a brain, smaller than the tip of your fingernail. And with that brain, the monarch flies from Canada to central Mexico, 3,000 kilometers, to a forest it has never been to before. To trees its great-grandparents roosted in. The destination, inherited. The journey, alone. Scientists studying human longevity have recently identified a pattern in the lifestyles of people who live past 100 years old across different cultures and continents. The pattern is not about diet alone, though diet matters. It is not about exercise alone, though movement matters. The most consistent factor they found was the quality and depth of social connection. People who felt strongly bonded to a community, who were needed, who had regular, meaningful contact with others, lived longer, regardless of other factors. Not proximity, not the number of contacts, the depth, the sense of being known and knowing. We are creatures shaped for connection, and when we find it, the body takes note. A study of language and thought recently found that the particular language you speak influences how you perceive time. English speakers, for example, tend to conceptualize time as a horizontal line, with the past behind them and the future ahead. Mandarin speakers more often conceptualize time vertically, with earlier events above and later ones below. The Aymara people of the Andes conceptualize the past as in front of them, since it is known and can be seen, and the future as behind, since it cannot. They walk into the past. The future pushes them from behind. Time is not a universal experience. The container we keep it in is shaped by the words, "We learned before we knew. We were learning anything." A team of researchers recently succeeded in translating the brain signals of a paralyzed person directly into speech, in real time, using a device implanted in the speech motor cortex. The person had been unable to speak for years, due to a stroke. After the implant and training, they could form words by simply trying to speak, and the device translated the neural patterns into synthesized speech at a rate close to natural conversation. They could say their name. They could ask for water. They could say, "I love you." The gap between thought and voice, which had been absolute, became navigable. Something crossed that gap, because someone spent years trying to build the bridge. Scientists recently found that the Amazon rainforest creates its own rain. This is not entirely new science, but the new research has measured the process more precisely than before. The trees of the Amazon release enormous quantities of water vapor and tiny biological particles that act as nuclei around which water droplets form. These particles seed the clouds above the forest. The clouds drop rain onto the forest. The forest absorbs the rain and returns it to the air. The Amazon is not simply growing in its climate. It is making its climate. It is maintaining the conditions of its own survival through the simple act of being alive and breathing. A forest that makes the rain that the forest needs. A loop so elegant, it is hard to believe. It is not intentional. A new study of whale migration found that humpback whales make decisions about where to travel based not just on instinct or memory, but on social information gathered from other whales. They observe the behavior of other individuals, follow companions who appear to know a route, and update their navigation accordingly. Culture, in the sense of socially transmitted behavior, shapes their movements through the ocean. Different populations have different traditions, different routes, different preferred feeding grounds, passed from generation to generation, not through DNA, but through observation and imitation. The whale learns from other whales. The ocean they cross is mapped, not in their genes alone, but in the collective knowledge of their kind. Scientists studying the genetics of color vision recently confirmed that some women carry 4 distinct types of color receptors in their eyes instead of the usual 3. Most humans have 3 types, each sensitive to a different part of the light spectrum. Color blindness often results from a deficiency in one of these, but a small percentage of women, owing to a specific combination of genes on the X chromosome, have 4. They are called tetrachromats. They may be able to distinguish between colors that appear identical to the rest of us. A world more finely divided by hue, more subtly gradated, more precisely colored. A world richer than the one most of us see. And it is the same world, just perceived differently. A discovery in the field of neuroscience recently gave us evidence that the hippocampus, the brain regions central to memory and navigation, may also play a role in imagining the future. People with hippocampal damage have difficulty not just recalling the past, but constructing detailed mental images of future scenarios. They can describe what might happen, but the richness of the imagined future, its sensory detail and spatial quality, is impoverished. Memory and imagination may be the same faculty, turned in different directions. The brain uses what it knows to construct what might be, assembling tomorrow from the pieces of yesterday. The past is not just behind you. It is the material from which your future is being quietly built. Scientists exploring the deep sea recently found a sponge that appears to be more than 10,000 years old, growing on the seamount it has occupied since before the end of the last ice age. Sea sponges are among the simplest multicellular animals. No brain, no nervous system, no heart, no apparent complexity. And yet this one has been alive filtering seawater, growing by millimeters per decade, in the cold darkness of the deep, for 10,000 years. 10,000 years of simply being, of doing the one thing it knows how to do, in the same spot, without interruption, without change. There is a kind of devotion in that, even if that is not the right word, a faithfulness to a single life that few things manage. A recent study of meditation found that experienced meditators show measurable differences in the density of gray matter in regions associated with attention, emotional regulation, and interoception, the sense of the body's internal state. And these differences appear proportional to the number of hours spent in practice. The brain is physically shaped by where attention is placed, repeatedly, over years. The act of returning the mind to stillness, again and again, builds something, a capacity, a structure, not a metaphorical strengthening, a literal, measurable, physical change in the tissue of the brain. What you practice becomes what you are. Astronomers have recently detected the faintest galaxy ever observed. It is so dim that it produces less than 1% of the light of a galaxy like our Milky Way, despite containing billions of stars. The stars themselves are ancient, formed in the early universe, when galaxies were still young and the raw material of star formation was abundant. This galaxy apparently ran out of gas. In the literal sense, the gas from which new stars are made billions of years ago. And since then, it has simply endured, growing dimmer as its old stars age, producing no new light. A galaxy at the end of itself, still there, still present, just quieter than it once was. Scientists studying the immune system recently found that immune cells can enter the brain through a previously unknown pathway, moving through the skull itself, via tiny channels in the bone. This was not thought to be possible. The brain has long been considered immunologically privileged, protected behind the blood-brain barrier from the normal activity of the immune system. But these skull channels allow immune cells to pass directly from the bone marrow into the meningeal tissue surrounding the brain, and from there to play a role in brain health and disease. The brain is not as isolated as we thought. The boundary between the brain and the rest of the body is more porous, more dynamic, more actively managed than we knew. A team of researchers studying animal behavior recently documented that fish can recognize themselves in a mirror. Mirror self-recognition has long been considered a test of higher cognitive function, something associated with great apes, dolphins, elephants, not fish, but cleaner wrasse, small fish that remove parasites from larger fish, were shown their reflection, and then marked with a colored spot on their bodies that was only visible in the mirror. They attempted to scrape the mark off, suggesting they recognized the reflection as themselves, and the mark as something foreign on their own body. The boundaries of self-awareness, it seems, extend further through the animal kingdom, than we had imagined. Perhaps awareness has many forms, many temperatures, many degrees of depth. And we are just beginning to develop instruments sensitive enough to measure them. Scientists studying ancient volcanic activity recently found evidence that a series of enormous eruptions, roughly 252 million years ago, triggered the largest mass extinction in Earth's history, the Permian extinction, in which roughly 96% of all marine species and 70% of all terrestrial vertebrate species were lost, appears to have been caused primarily by volcanic winter and the chemical changes it brought to the oceans. But the world recovered. Over millions of years, life filled the emptied niches. New species emerged. New ecosystems formed. The recovery was slow beyond comprehension, but it came. Life, after even the greatest catastrophe, found its way back. The Earth does not give up. It simply waits and tries again in a new form. And now, gently, we come to the end of the night's discoveries. Not because there are no more. There are always more. The world never stops producing them, but because we have reached the hour when knowing can be set aside in favor of simply resting. You have traveled tonight through mosses and markets, through deep ocean and deep space, through the brains of ravens and the roots of ancient trees, through the oldest ice and the coldest laboratories. You have visited the inside of a black hole's neighborhood and the inside of a cleaner wrass's reflected gaze. You have heard a whale call a name and watched a tiny worm wake from 46,000 years of sleep. And through all of it, you have been here, in this body, in this room, in this darkness, breathing. That breathing is the constant. Everything else moves, discovers, shifts, surprises, but the breath stays. In and out, slow and even. The oldest rhythm you know. The one that was there before you were aware enough to notice it. And that will keep going tonight, without any effort from you at all. You do not have to do anything now. The moss is pressing itself slowly across its surface. The forest is tending to itself. The ocean is cleaning itself in tides. The stars are burning or dying or forming, without your supervision. The world is doing its work. Let yours wait. Let the thinking quiet down. Let the questions dissolve into the dark. If your eyes are not already closed, let them close now. Let the room go dark behind them. Let the weight of your body settle fully into whatever is beneath you. You are held. You have always been held by the planet, by gravity, by the patient, ancient rock of the earth beneath everything. The same earth that has been here for 4.5 billion years, that has been tropical and frozen and green and barren, that has survived collisions and extinctions, and every kind of catastrophe, is holding you right now. Quietly, without effort, without hesitation. The discoveries will still be there tomorrow. The octopus will still be dreaming. The swift will still be asleep in the sky. The ancient sponge will still be filtering its cold water in the deep. And you will be here, rested, a little cleaned by sleep, a little edited by the night, ready to be curious again when morning comes. But for now, there is nothing to know, nothing to find, nothing to hold. Only the breath, only the dark, only the soft and ancient stillness of a world at rest.